Good morning and welcome to the February Buckinghamshire and Milton Keynes Fire Authority meeting. Welcome everybody. I'd first like to welcome Matt Parr, Her Majesty's Inspector of Fire and Rescue Services, and Catherine Richardson, who is a service liaison with the Inspectorate, and they're joining us today for item 10, which we will take at the beginning, right at the beginning. To accommodate the participation of our visitors from, as I've got all the initials here, HMI, CFRS, we'll be taking agenda item at the right beginning before agenda item 9. I'd also like to mention Area Commander Steve Wells, who, as you will see from the Chairman's announcements meeting, is retiring, and this will be his last full authority meeting. So, as I said, you'll find more time to do things now. Although members of the public are allowed to attend and observe in limited numbers, we are recording the meeting and a copy will be uploaded onto the authority's YouTube channel. To comply with social distancing guidelines, some officers will be contributing to the meeting remotely. Chief Fire Officer Jason Thelwell is also joining the meeting remotely, as is Daniel Henderson from the Inspectorate as well. In order to facilitate the best possible experience for all those participating in the meeting, can I please ask those who are participating in the meeting remotely to switch off your microphone and camera when not speaking. You will be audible and visible in the recording of the meeting if you do not do so. And of course that you will be held up to ridicule if we know that it's something that we can take the mickey out of. If remote participants wish to speak during the meeting, please turn on your camera to indicate a wish to respond to a question or make a comment. We go to item number 1, apologies.
Councillors Christensen and Hussain.
Thank you. The minutes of the meeting of the 8th of December. These are minutes, and this is for accuracy only. Are you happy that they are an accurate meeting, minutes of the meeting? Gosh, we've really got people attending. Disclosure of interests. Are there any disclosures of interest? Agenda item 9C, which is a member's allowances, does not require any member to declare interest, nor does the budget vote. So there are no declarations. You've received my Chairman's announcements, and we will then go on to matters arising from the previous meeting. Are there any questions?
Can I yes. Because I think it is noteworthy that Steve is retiring, so I wonder if we could just thank Steve in the traditional way for those many years of service. So.
And we do mean that, really do mean that. Matters arising from the previous minutes, are there any matters that people want to raise?
Chairman, I was asked to provide an update in respect of FA 27 about the enhanced vetting of firefighters, which I'm happy to do. The 3 group leaders were co-signatories to a letter sent on the 14th of December to Lord Greenhow, Minister of State for Fire, and to the Chairman of the National Fire Chiefs Council, endorsing the current practice of Buckinghamshire Fire and Rescue Service in obtaining enhanced DBS checking for all of its firefighters on recruitment and on a regular basis during their employment. The letter sought the Ministers and the NFCC's endorsement of Buckinghamshire Fire and Rescue Service's position and their support for making the necessary amendments to the legislation in order that a firefighter becomes an accepted occupation, so that this type of enhanced vetting should become the norm across all fire and rescue services nationally. Letters of support have been received from the NFCC Chairman and the Minister of State. These have been circulated to all members. As mentioned in the minutes, the Chief Fire Officer has been instrumental in the submission of a business case to the Ministry of Justice, making the case for law reform. And on the 28th of January this year, the Minister of Justice has sent out questionnaires to all Chief Fire Officers canvassing their opinions. This service's return has been completed in readiness for submission before the deadline of the 18th of February 2022. I hope that's useful, Chairman.
Yes, very useful. I think we were all surprised that firefighters didn't have to have an enhanced DBS, and so we certainly did write to the Minister about this. And hopefully, and I understand that a lot of work has been done behind the scenes on it too. Agenda item 6, petitions. Are there any petitions?
None, Chairman.
Are there any questions?
None, Chairman.
Agenda item 8, which is committee matters. Can I hand over to you, Mr. Britton, please?
Thank you, Chairman, members. This is a further amendment to the authority's procedural standing orders, to that agreed at the June annual meeting. The alterations are as set out on page 5, and I trust that these are self-explanatory. The recommendation is towards the top of page 5, which is that the following amendments be made to the standing orders for the authority and its committees. That's the recommendation, Chairman.
Are there any questions? Are we happy to agree with that change? Agreed. Thank you. I'm now going to item 10, which is Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Services, Buckinghamshire Fire and Rescue Service Inspection Report 2021. As you'll know, the Inspectorate published our latest report on the 15th of December as part of the first tranche reports following our third inspection, including the pandemic inspection, which took place during the spring of last year. I'm first going to hand over to Commander Simon Tuffley, who will introduce the report to us, and I will then also invite Her Majesty's Inspector of Fire and Rescue Services, Mr. Parr, to add anything further should he wish, before taking any questions you may have. But may I remind you that we have limited time and that you will be limited to one question. So I hand over to Mr. Tuffley, please.
Good morning, Chairman. Thank you. Good morning, members. This paper is to introduce the latest HMI CFRS report to the authorities for noting. There are 4 appendices attached to this report, including some accompanying letters, so I just wanted to outline those first, if that's okay. So Appendix 1 is the report itself. It's a 43-page document and is on page 109 to 154 of your pack. Appendix 2 is a copy of an inspection follow-up letter sent to the Chief Fire Officer in August 2021, setting out the cause of concern for prevention. It's a 2-page letter and is 155 to 156 in your pack. Appendix 3 is another 2-page letter sent to the Chief Fire Officer and the Chairman of the Authority on the 14th of December 2021, immediately prior to the Round 2 report being published. And this letter sets out the Inspectorate's expectations for responding to the report, and this can be found on pages 157 to 158 of your pack. And Appendix 4 is a copy of another letter sent to the Chief Fire Officer on the 12th of January this year, setting out our progress against the prevention recommendations since August 2021, and this can be found on pages 159 to 160 of your pack. So in summary, the Inspectorate published our latest report on the 15th of December last year as part of the first tranche of reports following our inspection during the spring and summer of 2021. The report has judged the service to require improvement across the 3 pillars and identifies 22 areas for improvement and 2 causes of concern, accompanied by 8 recommendations. Additionally, the previous cause of concern arising from the first round of inspections has been closed, and the Inspectorate recognises the work undertaken to address key areas from the last report against a difficult landscape of a global pandemic and over a short time frame. Although this closure of the efficiency cause of concern can be seen as progress, it would perhaps be remiss of us not to point out that we feel this inspection has revealed an improvement to our resourcing performance during a time of various lockdown periods during the global pandemic. Over this last period, many staff were either furloughed from their primary employment or not necessarily taking their leave until later in the year, which did have a positive impact on crewing levels across the immediate response and resilience capabilities. In truth, improvement has not been fully maintained in the longer term, and resilience of frontline services remains a key area of focus and priority for this service. In terms of the cause of concern for this inspection, the first cause of concern from round 2 was issued to the service by letter on the 6th of August, which is Appendix 2, and relates to prevention activity under the effectiveness pillar. The service provided an improvement plan to HMI MATPAR before the September deadline, setting out how we intend to address the issues identified. A routine inspection action plan update also went to the Overview and Audit Committee on the 10th of November 2021, along with the Prevention Evaluation Report, to provide assurance that the recommendations had been received and were being addressed. Officers have since met with the Inspectorate, who are planning to revisit the service in 2022 with an opportunity to close off this cause of concern if sufficient progress is demonstrated. And this was confirmed in the follow-up letter to the Chairman and the Chief Fire Officer on the 12th of January 2022, which is attached as Appendix 4. The second cause of concern from round 2 was issued under the People pillar on the 15th of December, and much of the work required to meet the recommendations is included within the authority's EDI objectives for 2020 to 2025, including the Year 1 update presented to the authority on the 16th of June 21. Owing to the deadline of addressing these recommendations by the 31st of January 2022, a progress meeting was held on the 7th of January, where HMICFRS were assured that there had been continued and significant progress in this area and the recommendations are being met. Wider to this, in terms of the State of Fire report, so further to the Tranche 1 inspection report publications, Her Majesty's Chief Inspector of Fire and Rescue Services, Sir Tom Windsor, also published his annual assessment of fire and rescue services in England. This report is his third and final report to the Secretary of State, and a link is provided within the executive summary of the cover paper. Notably, within his annual assessment, Sir Tom Windsor recognises this service to have made significant progress in increasing the numbers of fire safety inspectors, developing risk-based inspection programmes, and ensuring that protection activity is a main strategic priority. The report also recognises that this service has been creative and flexible in its approach to using on-call firefighters, and by introducing a flexi-firefighter contract, which enables staff to work more flexible shift patterns. In terms of the improvement plan, an updated improvement plan has been prepared and will be presented to the 16th of March Overview and Audit Committee, and thereafter to each Overview and Audit Committee meeting. Following the March meeting, a copy of the action plan will also be shared with all authority members for information. Furthermore, as per a requirement set out in the report covering letter to the Chairman and the Chief Fire Officer on the 14th of December 2021, a copy of the action plan will also be sent to HMI MATPAR within 56 working days of the report publication, which is no later than the 7th of March. So in closing, Chairman, thank you for listening, and now have the opportunity to hand over as you see fit.
Thank you, Mr. Tuffley. Mr. Parr, do you have anything to add to your report?
Yeah, I think probably fair to give a little bit of a context. I have with me Catherine Richardson, who's your service liaison lead, and also online is Damien Henderson, who's Chief of Staff for this region. So we get into some of the detailed questions later on. I'm probably going to look for support from them. As well as being your HMI, I'm the HMI for about 8 other fire and rescue services, including London Fire Brigade. And in policing, I'm the HMI for the Met Police and half a dozen others around the UK and loads overseas, etc. And so I know that Jason and the team will have been a bit disappointed with the report, but in context, Buckinghamshire Fire and Rescue Service is not one that I lose a lot of sleep about. There are some things that you need to improve, but there are police services and fire services that cause us real concern with the way they're run, the way the staff behave, some of the quality of, some of the professionalism of the way they approach things. That's not a concern here. The causes of concern are particularly specific, and there's one other thing that I'll touch on very briefly. So this is not a big worry for us, although I recognise that the report will have been disappointing. As you said, this is the second round. You were in the third of our tranches first time round. In the first time we inspected all fire and rescue services, you were in the first one on the second time. So I think there is some, it's only fair to recognise that this fire and rescue service had less time to improve than some of the others. We had to move you around largely, frankly, because of concerns about London Fire Brigade and the inspection demand on them and what that had as a knock-on for the rest of our scheduling, and I'm afraid it resulted in you moving from, as I say, the third tranche, first time round, to the first time this one. Also, the inspection work was done in July, so we're talking about 6.5, 7 months ago now, so I do recognise that a lot of work's been done since, but of course the report is a snapshot of what we saw in July. I recognise that things may have changed subsequently. Also recognise that, of course, COVID impacted all the inspections we were doing around that time, and Buckinghamshire had less time to recover back to something approaching normality after the pandemic than many others will have done. The last thing I would say on context for the report is that our standards are higher second time around. We know more about fire and rescue services. That was the first time we as an organisation that goes back 160 years or something, that was the first time we'd inspected fire. And I think we did a really good job, but we know the sector much better now, so we're demanding higher standards the second time around. The two causes of concern and the general gradings in the report, I want to reassure you that they're not just plucked out of thin air. We have a very rigorous way of determining whether we're giving fair grades, and we moderate those against a range of other inspected fire and rescue services. I think at the time we did Buckinghamshire, we looked at 8 to 10 others to make sure that the grades and the causes of concern were fair. And in fact, in your case, we also had our legal experts check, which we do on a sort of dip sample, random basis. Yours happened to come out, so that was also checked by barristers to make sure that what we were saying was fair and justified and backed up by the evidence. So that's my view. I think I'm very happy to take questions for as long as you want, and I'm personally quite interested to stay for the rest of the meeting. I know you're talking about the precept and increasing funding. I think there's a fascinating debate for your fire and rescue services about how you use that. The model of response in particular in Buckinghamshire is, as you know, unusual, verging on unique. On the one hand, it's very impressive. I think what our report reflects is the doubts about whether it's sustainable in the long term, and I'll be, intrigued's not the right word, but very interested to see how any increase in resource is going to be used to address what I think is almost a fundamental question facing Buckinghamshire, which is a model of response the right one, and is it sustainable in the long term?
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Parr? Mr. Lambert.
Madam Chairman, thank you very much. I'm Councillor Steve Lambert. I'm the lead member for People, Equalities, Diversity, Inclusion and Assurance. So your report, obviously I've read it twice now, and I also went through, I think, the disappointment and, the hold your head up high, guys. We're doing a really good job here, despite activities that came through when the report came through. Because in my humble opinion, Chairman, and I'll take this as my opinion rather than that of the authority, of course, I think that I don't think that, I'll start again, because I heard what you said in the first time round. You didn't really know what you were doing as an organisation to our sector, but
Come on,
my
I'm not
words.
sorry, I'm going to interrupt you there. I'm not going to take a comment like that. I did not say we didn't know what we're doing.
No,
I said we've learned a bit more, so please be precise, and if you can avoid insults, I'll be quite grateful.
I'm not going to insult you. I didn't mean it like that. Please don't be so sensitive. But I would say that the moving of the rounds of us as an organisation did create less time for us to move through that improvement cycle. As you were learning as an inspectorate about how the fire service all operates and how we benchmark and the activities is where I was getting to. And that it was unhelpful that we got to that position. The people portfolio went backwards in this inspection. And we provided a substantial amount of evidence as to the work that we've been doing to really change the face of our workforce, to improve and engage as much as we can, but as you highlighted, the limited financial envelope that we had up until that point. Obviously, I will wait till the debate in the next session about what we do about the precept, but that would provide an opportunity to significantly change stuff. As a sector, in particular this service, has had its hands handcuffed rather than tied about the ability to recruit and to deliver against that people plan. We've done exceptionally well with the way that we manage our resourcing. We have a relatively unique model to us to do that. Hats off to all of our teams that put that into place and manage every single shift to make sure that it works, and to keep our people safe across Buckinghamshire and Milton Keynes. The equality and diversity part of it, the action plan is huge. It took us a long time to put it together and make sure it was well thought through, fully engaging with our members and of our staff, right the way across the piece. And yet I feel, and this is a personal thought process, I feel that was not the weight of that work and the journey that we are doing, which is an 18, 24-month plan, wasn't appropriately recognised in there. And the fact that our hands were absolutely tied about recruiting. You know, we've taken on so many apprentices. We were a forerunner for taking on apprentices, and to really, do the best we can to get as many diverse employees as we possibly can. But the sector is the way the sector is, and the constraints that we have for role-related tests and so forth. I think that should have also been recognised across the sector about how those sort of problems are addressed, because you can take a horse to water, but if they're constantly going to be ridden to the point they fall over, it's never going to be able to drink when it gets there. And I feel that's where, as a sector, we're going with it. When looking through it, the amount of responses that we had, and one of the comments in your letter says, staff are committed to the service and feel pride in the work that they do. They really do, and so do we as members. And many staff, however, feel overworked and under pressure. And you do go on to say, with negative affects their productivity and morale. I don't know one organisation, and I work with many, that feel that way. The pandemic taught us all a lot of things about ourselves as well as organisations, and stresses are in different places than they were before the pandemic, and even they are today as we're returning to normal life. But that also, I think, should have been pulled out a bit further for the work that we do to support our staff all the way through the pandemic, the visits that the chief made, the deputy chief made, to as many operational frontline as possible. We kept the service running and delivered on top of that to support the local NHS and partners and local authority with the vaccine programme, in particular at Step Mandeville and Wickham, and supporting in Milton Keynes. So for me, as the people portfolio holder, I understood it, I read it, but I didn't think that you had taken the evidence we had provided into the seriousness of the context of where we were and what we were doing in that. And I was disappointed in our grading for that. I'm not going to talk about the other parts of the portfolio because I could go on for a long time, and I've gone on long enough. But suffice to say, I was disappointed in the people portfolio part because I didn't think you had taken the evidence on board enough or recognised that it was there. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm not sure what the question was in that, but I actually agree with much of what you said. I think equally fair to recognise that I made the comment about coming to COVID. We had, of course, done a national thematic inspection about how fire and rescue services had coped with COVID, and many of the points you raised, with which I firmly agree, were recognised in that letter. We also wrote to the Chief Fire Officer specifically saying what we'd seen in Buckinghamshire during the COVID, and all the points you raised, I agree with. We saw much similar work done across the country, and I think it was, in general, a good moment for fire and rescue services in demonstrating how their can-do approach and utility and organisation had very wide public benefit. So I think that's the point you're making, with which I completely agree. I'm sorry you're disappointed with the grade. I come back to my earlier point that there is a difference between sometimes what is planned, and I'm not talking just here, I see this on a very regular basis, between what's planned and what's talked about at management level. I'm not talking about here, I'm talking about within the fire and rescue services, because it's them we inspect, not you. And what feedback we get when we dig deep into the bottom of, into the weeds of all organisations. And I think the cause of concern on people reflected some of the evidence we heard elsewhere in the fire and rescue service. I think, again, come back to my point of view that, of course, today, understandably, we're very much concerned with Buckinghamshire Fire and Rescue Services. We inspect them all over the country. There are fire and rescue services who, in my opinion, have done a better job on the things you describe than have been done here, hence the grade. There are people that got very strong grades, and we can point to those afterwards.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Barr, and for your team for the work that you put into this. I'm equally disappointed by the report because I don't think it recognises the context in which the Fire Authority has been making these decisions, in particularly the financial context, given the level of cuts that have happened. And in speaking to members of, it's not that I don't disagree that prevention activity is very, very important, but when you have had the level of cuts that this service has had, and I'm not going to try and speak on a national picture, but it is things like that that will be forced to that will suffer because the emergency response continues to have to be the priority. And the expansion of the services, given the pressure because of the having less police, becoming that first responder in floods, police, many, many situations, and the expanding role of the fire service because of the cuts elsewhere, I don't think is, from my perspective, is not properly put into the context of why the challenges that there are. And it's not that I disagree that the things that you've pointed out are important. I absolutely agree that they are important, but I think there's a level of just not recognising what's actually happened in terms of funding and the amount of effort this team has put into place to try and make sure that the safety of our residents is first and foremost, and therefore they have made some very, very difficult decisions. And so I guess what I'd like you to do is, I appreciate what you're saying about us looking forward and the discussion that we're going to have next on the agenda, but I guess I would ask you to reflect on what you feel the impact of the financial cuts has meant in Buckingham.
That's a really fair comment, Chairman. We do recognise it. We do refer to it in the report, maybe not with the prominence that you'd wish to see, but it's there. I'm struck, there's a graphic at the start of every report that shows spend per head of population for your particular fire and rescue services compared to the national one. And I can't remember the exact figure, but your spend is amongst the lowest. It's something like 80% of the national average. It is starkly low, and I completely recognise that. I think I've said in the first report that there were doubts in our view about whether your long-term sustainability because of funding. So I completely recognise that. And I also recognise that there has been, and we've referred to this, there's been a great deal of innovation and dedication in trying to resolve that. What we've had this debate long and hard. You are one of the fire and rescue services that's caused us the most debate internally within the inspectorate. Because you have this, Jekyll and Hyde's not the right way to do it, but on the one hand, you're very efficient. You use the resources that you've got extremely efficiently, and as I said, innovatively and carefully. On the other hand, the cracks show from that. And so we have taken a collective decision as Inspectorate that we will report on the cracks, because that's the kind of the ultimate service of the public, rather than on the performance given the funding envelope. So, you know, do we say, do they do a good job for the money they've got, or do we say, do they do a good job for the public? And we take the second view, which necessarily, I think, was against the Fire and Rescue Service in the grades, etc., and we try and explain that in context. I thought we'd explained it quite clearly. I've said publicly, and I'm quite happy to say here, I absolutely recognise just how tight the funding's been for this FRS compared to many others we look at. And within that envelope, I don't dispute at all that there's been a professional and careful approach to spending the money, but the cracks show.
Sorry, if that's all right, can I ask, after you do these reports, I appreciate you give the feedback to us, but do you give the feedback back to government saying, here's Bucks, for example, just as you've said, you know, given its funding envelope, it does very well, but the cracks are starting to show. What these organisations need is more funding, because actually this is you know, the cracks are showing because of the funding situation.
I have had conversations with ministers on the subject, but we haven't formally gone to other than what's in the state of policing about, you know, the pressures that Fire and Rescue Service has been under. We don't go specifically to government and say you need to fund Buckinghamshire more and London less, or Surrey less and Hampshire more, or that sort of thing. We don't do that. I think our report is very stark. If you look at that graphic at the start, Catherine, you've got it there. What does it say? Yeah, so your firefighter for cost per year is £20. The national average is 24. You are one of the lowest. So we point that out in the reports. But what we don't do then is give you better grades because you've found it harder because of the costings.
You're way down the list, Councillor Sutchbury. Way down the list. Councillor
With the
Marlin.
greatest respect, I'll take that as it's meant.
I'm sure you're seeing the best of politicians, Mr. Parr. I'm Councillor Marland, I'm the leader of the Labour group, and I'm leader of Milton Keynes Council. And what I say next might be a bit mean, but I can often take inspectorate reports with a pinch of salt, having sat through numerous Ofsted reports. And this, I think, sometimes, and I've expressed this to the chair and the vice chair, sometimes you can get wrapped up in some of the nitty-gritty of a report of an inspector, because that's, and it's not your fault, that's what you've been tasked to do. They're the boxes you've been asked to tick. But that KPI exercise doesn't always relate, I think, and you just made a very good point about our dual role as a fire authority. One, about the management of the operational team, but also about representing the public. And I don't think the public would care about what is in 95% of this report. I understand that obviously any organisation is layered, and therefore if you're not recruiting firefighters, maybe there is something within the people department that means that you're not recruiting firefighters where somebody else would. So I understand that layering, but I think when it comes to that sort of red phone ringing, that old political advert and people picking it up, I think the vast majority of people will just look at, I think it's pages like 11 to 18, isn't it, about what happens when I pick up the phone. And I think where my group, and I think the people of Milton Keynes and Buckinghamshire are really concerned, is in the robustness of the model that we have gone down. And I would like to know, as you're here, how much of that model is not as robust as it could be because of finance, and how much is it is not robust because ultimately a model is only as good as how you can resource it. So we've been told that the fact that on-call firefighters, etc., the current system only survives because a number of firefighters are doing overtime and they don't have to do that. So if all firefighters tomorrow decided not to do voluntary all firefighters tomorrow decided not to do voluntary overtime, this area would not have proper fire cover. And that's not good enough. And that's a real worry. And therefore, my question to you is, within your report, you touch on it, but I'd perhaps maybe like a fuller answer about just how robust the operational model is that Buckinghamshire have gone down, because it is fairly unique and will only be tested, I think, under extreme stress, and may only fail when that extreme stress happens. And that's the worry. And I suppose the question is, what's the risk of a catastrophic failure of the current model?
I agree with you that the public interest is mainly, where we say the public interest in fire and rescue services tends to be relatively limited, and it tends to be relatively limited to, if I have an emergency, are they going to turn up quickly with the right kit, and are they going to be professionally trained to do the job that's required of them? That's definitely the acid test. And coming back to my earlier comments about fire and rescue services of whom we have concerns, there are fire and rescue services in which you can't wholeheartedly say yes to both of those questions. Not here. So I think the public should be reassured that at the moment they get the service they need in that context. I know Jason's online, and I'm sure Mick would say the same thing, that theoretically what you describe is a problem, that it's a system to an extent dependent on goodwill, and that goodwill can always be withdrawn. I think Mick would probably say it never has been in the past, there's no danger that it will be, it's perfectly sound basis for planning. But equally, there's always going to be a slight nervousness about a system that has the potential to unravel, however unlikely such a thing is. My concern is slightly different. You have effectively, again, it's either genius or chaos, and at the moment it looks very good. But you've got some stations and pumps around the county which contribute very little to the overall effect. At the moment, that doesn't seem to matter, because the way you're set up, that means the coverage that you've declared is achieved on a very regular basis. Now, some of what I tease Jason by calling the ghost fleet does not contribute a great deal. It doesn't meet its standards, and so availability of retained firefighting here in Buckinghamshire is much lower than the national average. But that's a deliberate part of the problem. What worries me is that at some stage, you're going to have to spend money on keeping those updated. You're going to have to buy new pumps, you're going to have to refurbish premises, and you don't really have the money to do it at the moment. And so those less productive parts of the service aren't sustainable in long term in their current format. So at some stage a decision's going to have to be made about, is this the operating model that suits us, or do we need to have a revision? That's why I say that your later debate today for me is an interesting one. And what I wouldn't want is any extra money just going into continually feeding the current system. It seems to me that extra money is a catalyst almost for a discussion about whether the model is sustainable in the long term and how it should best be supported.
So just a very brief follow-up question is, that's quite interesting. So is that statement saying that those operational bases may be surplus to requirements, or is it that currently they're not funded and within the model, and actually if they are funded, the model would be more robust? Because that seems a fundamental question.
Both of those statements are true.
Councillor Rankin.
Thank you, Chair. I think everyone here can agree that the fire services across the UK have had a really challenging couple of years with COVID and Grenfell extra pressures. So they've had to be really flexible. They've had to change their approaches to adapt to COVID in terms of visits and things like that, and they've had extra pressure on them from Grenfell in terms of resources and reacting to that. And I took the opportunity to look at the Inspectorate website. I think there's 12 fire services that are published on a list that have been inspected recently in Tranche 1. And out of these 12, 7 have the 3 pillars needs improvement across the board. So my question really is around the Inspectorate. The fire services have been adaptable and flexible, but it seems to me that the Inspectorate is quite rigid in its approach in terms of its metrics and is not flexible in terms of recognising temporary situations. And that's why we've got 7 services that have needs improvement, rather than potentially these 7 services performing badly. It might be the approach to the Inspectorate. And what concerns me in that inflexible approach is that services that are innovative and are pushing the boundaries and are trying to advance the fire service are not reflected in the metrics in the report to the level that they could be. So there's a comparative measure looking at services. And if you've got an innovative service that's doing something differently and seems, on the face of it, quite successful, it can come out badly in terms of the comparative approach. So my question to you is, how often do the Inspectorate look at themselves in terms of their approach to inspections?
That's a really good question. I pretty much agree with everything you said. I wouldn't call it inflexible. However, I think one of the things we've always been adamant about is that we have to treat every inspected body fairly. So having a common, what you call inflexibility, I would call having a common set of standards by which to judge performance. And if what we simply don't want to do is see something in area A and say X about it, and see something the same in area B and say Y about it. So we work really hard at doing that. I think coming on to your how often do we look at ourselves, continually. We have academic reference groups, we do evaluations about the nature of our inspection, and I know we were compared with Ofsted earlier on. I don't know much about Ofsted. I have friends and family who are teachers, and I know their opinion of Ofsted. I think generally the engagement with the sector, who I like to think we've taken along with us and explained our methodology and explained the standards we were going to mark to and explained the approach we were going to take in inspecting, has actually been pretty strong. We have lots of engagement with Fire Chiefs Council and indeed leaders from across the sector. So I think it's slightly unfair to give the impression of an inflexible, non-listening inspectorate. Where you're, coming back to this circumstance, I think we've reflected in the report that there is a great deal of innovation and we have generally, I mean, Catherine will know this, we've been through this, we've had we agonised over what was the right grade to give for both effectiveness and efficiency in Buckinghamshire, because you could, spin it's the right word, but you could interpret what's been done here as being, as I say, genius, super efficient, and very effective. Or, as we've chosen to do, and this is after a long debate, recognise that where there is real innovation, it left all of us, and I suspect, if I'm honest, some of the time it probably leaves leadership in the fire service as well, uncomfortable about the measures that you've been forced into to provide a service with the budget you've got. Coming back to those figures, you're getting 80% of the average of England and Wales. If you hadn't done something innovative, then you would have been inadequate across the board with those figures. You wouldn't have met the standards. So it is a measure of the imagination and dedication that your scores are where they are. But what we couldn't do is say they're good comparison with other services that we've graded you against, who may very possibly have a significantly greater funding envelope than you've got. So I hope that explains it. We are, I've worked, I haven't worked in the fire sector or policing previously to coming into this job. I am very reassured about the fairness and the openness of the process that we have as an inspectorate.
Just quickly, Chair, my real concern is the demoralising impact on a very innovative leadership in the fire service who are doing stuff with a limited budget that is groundbreaking, and to have reports in this way is quite demoralising for them, and that's my concern, that it would have a negative long-term impact on performance.
Well, I hope it doesn't, but you really couldn't expect me to write reports that were designed to bolster the morale of people involved in the service. I don't want to be flippant and say, you know, that's not our concern, because of course it's our concern, but ultimately we need to report fairly to the public, and I don't think there is any reason for the Chief Fire Officer or any of his team to be downhearted about what we've said. I come back to my earlier point, this is not a fire and rescue service about which we're losing sleep.
Councillor Stutchbury, please be brief.
I'll be as brief as I possibly can, Chairman, because I know how much you love to listen.
I look forward to that.
Thank you very much. Firstly, can I thank you for the report? Can I thank you for the time you put into it? I recognise your role in this is to do due diligence and assess the authority. And there's been a lot said about the emotions of the report and about personal views of it. As you can tell, it's a political arena. What I would ask of you is, do you agree that if resources are increased, the management of those resources needs to be a step change in supporting the key product of the authority, which is its firefighters, its staff, and its ability to deliver? And I note your comments cogently and correctly made about resources and how we use resources. Would you agree with me that we need to look back at our resources to actually realise the assets we've got and to make sure that we cover, which is a large rural area. As you can tell by my accent, I am rural. And would you agree with those needs to be focused on? And again, I think it's very easy. I've been on report most of my life, and most of my education I was on report. So I'm used to being on report. I think it's a healthy situation to be in, and governance is a good thing. So I take no offence about that. And comparing to Ofsted isn't, as I do get involved in children's services, it's not a fair comparison, so it doesn't count. I'll discount that, and thank you for that. And would you agree with those points that I've made have to be key if we budget more resources?
Yes, I do. Look, first let's be clear. Mark Hemming's a really good bloke, in my view. Gets a very impressive control of what's being done. This is not a criticism in any way of the authority or the fire service's ability to manage its resources. That we have no doubt about that at all. It's a question of, this particular question is a question of the model you have chosen to operate and whether it's long-term the right one, and you know, whether there are other ways you should skin the cat. I think that you know, if you have a more optimistic funding position, what you shouldn't do is just say, phew, that enables us to carry on without quite the pressure in. It strikes me as a moment for you to reconsider, to, you know, almost back to basics. Right now, is the model still the best, the only way we can approach providing the service to across the county and Milton Keynes? So I think that's my point. Not that we've got any doubt about the competence or the expertise of the way resources are managed. We haven't. It's a question of the way the organisation's set up and whether now is a time to just say, well, that's the way we set up. Phew, we've got some more money. We can spend some more money on some favourite projects or whatever we want to do. It strikes me it's a moment to consider whether you've got the right model operating or not.
And lastly, Councillor Mullen made a very good point about the overtime issues. And I worked in agriculture most of my life. I was working immensely long hours with no backup and no resource. And if an animal was going to calve, if I wasn't there, it died. And so what we don't want to compare them comparisons, but I do understand what pressure of work is. And I think Councillor Mullen made a very good point that we need to respect that pressure of work, and we need to actually recognise that, because people can carry on at pressure for a period of time, and once they get to a period where they can cope no more, then the envelope wraps. And that's the purpose of inspections, and that's the importance of scrutiny and governance. And would you agree that's a priority? And again, lastly, I thank you for the report.
There is a degree of risk in the system as it's currently set up. Chief Fire Officer will tell you, and I'm sure Mr. Osborne will tell you, that that's low risk, and I wouldn't dispute that. It's a question for the authority as a whole about whether you want to have a system that carries any nature, a risk of that nature. I think you've got, again here, you have got a well-led and positive workforce here. We don't see that around the country universally. It's really up to you to decide whether you want to rely on that degree of goodwill and engagement being essential to keep the operating model going. That's not a question I can comment. I'm saying that there is a degree of risk in it. It's up to you to decide whether you want to carry that risk or not.
Thank you. Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you, Chair. I'm David Hopkins. I'm the Vice Chair of the authority. I'm a Milton Keynes councillor, along with one or two other colleagues here today. And I have finance in my portfolio, and finance isn't the solver of every problem. It's like any other resource. It's what you do with it, to be blunt. And therefore, I welcome the report. I welcome the report, and I welcome your opening comments as well, because I think on the whole that was very positive. Gives us a great deal of encouragement, a great deal to be satisfied with, but it doesn't alter for one moment the fact that we need something around which to base our challenge. We need to challenge the way we do things. We need to examine and challenge our outcomes, and we need to challenge the way we're established. Because Milton Keynes is the fastest growing part of the UK, there are elements of Buckinghamshire which are growing equally quickly. We're in the Oxford-Cambridge arc with all that goes with that. We have a responsibility to deliver a first-class service across all of our area, and we're determined to do that. Therefore, we need to respond to the report, and we need to use the report as a template against which to base that response. For example, already, and this isn't a result of the report, but the Innovative Hub in Milton Keynes, which we've opened, due to the great work of my colleague here, looks like a model, to me, a model for the future. So we need to examine how best we can possibly transfer that model and replicate that model elsewhere, because we feel it's one that's working. So we're looking forward. We are looking forward in terms of finance. You're going to hear in a few moments' time that we're making some progress on that. To some extent, we are the victims of our own misjudgment from a few years ago, but we need to overcome that and move forward and make best use of resource. So I think using your report as the template and the model for the future, taking on board seriously and not responding negatively to your report is the way forward. And therefore, thank you for coming here today. Thank you for giving us your report, and we look forward to seeing you again in the spring and during the course of the year, because I'm confident we can show you very quickly how we're moving forward and actually addressing the problems and the demands that the people of Buckinghamshire and Milton Keynes quite rightly place upon us.
I don't think there was a question in there, was there? Thank you for that.
It doesn't have to be a question. You could,
but it
do,
was-
you,
it
I
was
could
very
always
well
say, do you agree?
Thank you. So, Councillor McLean.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you very much for the report and for attending. I'm the lead member for Health and Safety and another one of the Milton Keynes councillors. So I'm very pleased to read on page 36 about the positive health and safety culture. It's very good, and I've been doing this job just over a year now. And so much so that the chairman this year gave her award to the manager of that department, which shows that the great importance that this fire service shows to health and safety. And the only question I've got, and I think my colleague Councillor Hopkins has alluded to it, is on the second page of your last letter dated the 12th of January. This may include a further visit in spring 2022. Have you got a date for that yet?
No, we're in agreement that we need to work together with the service to decide when the best time is, and certainly dependent on resources within HMIC FRS. But we're in close contact, as we were in the lead up to the inspection, to make sure that we do get the time right to be able to conduct that follow-up. So no date agreed yet.
Thank you. No further question.
Thank you. So thank you for your report, although we do not entirely agree with the outcomes. We will work with you to ensure that Buckingham Milton Keynes Fire Authority carries on with our being innovative in the provision of the service. And I think we all acknowledge our staff for the wonderful work that they've done over the last couple of years, particularly with the pandemic. And perhaps that could be minuted. So we then go to the recommendation on page 103, which is that that the BFRS HMI CFRS Round 2 inspection report, Appendix 1, be noted. Are we agreed? I do thank you for coming and talking to us, and you did give us some little bits, of encouragement, so I thank you for that. And I know that you have to go off, but stay for as long as you wish, and we'll see you again in the not too distant future, I'm sure. But thank you for coming. Thank you. Okay. We now go to agenda item 9, which is on the first part, which is on pages 23 to 32. And I hand over to Councillor Hopkins.
Well, very brief on this one, Chair, because it is very much a technical paper, so I'm going to hand straight away to the officer. It's either Mark or Asif. I never know which one it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hopkins. Good morning. It's light just morning. Members and officers, hopefully you can all hear and see me okay. Today I'll be presenting you with the Prudential Code, Prudential Indicators and Minimum Revenue Provision for 22-23. As Councillor Hopkins has alluded to, this is a technical paper and is presented annually to the Fire Authority for approval. This paper also supports the medium-term financial plan, which will be presented at today's meeting. The Prudential Code was established to ensure the capital investment plans are affordable, prudent and sustainable, and that the Treasury management function are in accordance with good professional practice. The Prudential indicators presented here demonstrate the current plans for capital investment meet these criteria and present an acceptable level of risk to the authority. The minimum revenue provision is a statutory charge to general fund, which ensures that the authority has sufficient cash balances to repay borrowing upon maturity, reducing the refinancing risk. Since 2015-16, there have been sufficient funds set aside to cover the repayment of long-term borrowing. However, early repayment of these loans is currently not an option due to the prohibitive penalties on early repayment. There are also no plans for additional borrowing according to the medium-term financial plan. Thank you and happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions for Mr. Hussey? No. Can we then take the recommendation on page 23 that the Executive Committee approve the recommendations below for submission to the Fire Authority and that the authority be recommended to approve the prudential indicators for 2022-23 and the minimum revenue provision policy statement. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hussey. We then go to agenda item 9B, and again I'll hand over to Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you, Chairman. Just as the eagle-eyed among you, I presume I've got the same paper as everybody else. Under the recommendation, there should be a first line there that says it is recommended that the authority, and then the A, B and C and D. So I'd just like to amend it to include that additional line. Obviously, we're not going to discuss, the officers who know what they're talking about are going to discuss the £5. We're going to be looking at some of the key assumptions, indeed in some of the uncertainties, including pensions, which remains a constant topic that Mark and myself are discussing. And I'm sure that Asif, I presume Asif is going to introduce his paper, will be touching as well on any changes there have been over the past few days since we discussed this at Executive. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hopkins. Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members. Before I go into the detail of the report, as Councillor Hopkins alluded to, there has been a change in Appendix 1 and Appendix 2, which I'll come to at the end of the presentation. The main report in Annex A presents the proposed revenue and capital medium-term financial plan for the financial years 2022 to 2026-27. The final settlement, which was published earlier in February, showed that there was one key change in this settlement compared to previous years. The government has now provided lowest charging quartile of fire and rescue services with the flexibility to increase their Band D precepts by £5 in 22-23 only, without the need to hold a referendum. This is to assist FRAs in addressing immediate pressures and to maintain a sustainable income baseline for future years. Buckinghamshire Fire and Rescue Services is included within these 8 FRAs. The service's most recent inspectorate report, which was published in December 2021 by HMIC FRS, noted in its summary that they are encouraged by the service's work to improve value for money, but still have concerns about the service's funding model and its limited reserves are being used to supplement funding of its response functions. If the authority were to approve an additional £5 precept, this would result in approximately 1.1 million additional funding compared to the standard 2% precept increase. The additional funding would predominantly be used to utilise and recruit additional firefighters to build its response functions. Furthermore, the Fire Authority would be able to increase the revenue contributions to capital, which would build the reserves that are used for funding the capital programme, in the process addressing another concern raised within the HMIC FRS report. I just want to bring your attention to additional funding that's also been given to us this year as a one-off. There's an additional 822 million unring-fenced services grant that will be distributed to all tiers of the government. Again, this grant is only for 22-23, and it's to do with all the good work the sector has done, and they will be looking to look at it again next year to see how it's distributed. The funding is in recognition of the range of vital services delivered by all tiers of the government across the country. Published figures show that Buckinghamshire Fire and Rescue Service will receive £355,000, which has been reflected in our projection under the heading of Services Grant. Bring you over to council tax. In terms of council tax collection funds, as everyone's aware, with the pandemic last year, we actually had an adverse impact on our council tax base. It actually reduced by 0.65%. However, latest projections show recovery in the council collection fund with a projected growth of 2.19% in the tax base. As Councillor Hopkins alluded to a bit earlier on around pensions, there's still uncertainty around pensions following the ruling in December 2018 that transitional arrangements introduced for firefighter pension schemes in 2015 were discriminatory. The Executive Committee have adopted the immediate detriment framework in November 2021, and Buckinghamshire and Milton Keynes Fire Authority are currently processing claims from members who want to be treated as if they remained on the original pension scheme. It is expected that this will increase the costs in the long term, but it's yet difficult to quantify this impact. Now, if I could move everyone on to the revised appendices, just to bring to everyone's attention the key changes. You would have noticed the revenue support grant line and the business rates line have been revised down from 8 million to 7.826 million, a decrease of 174,000. Future year forecasts have also been updated to reflect this. Previous figures that were taken from the provisional settlement, which were an estimate, and actual figures are provided as at the 31st of January and now have been reflected in Appendix 1 and 2. The council's tax surplus figure in 2022-23 has also been revised downwards from a surplus of 257,000 to 222,000, a decrease of 35,000, as one of the billing authorities have recently confirmed their deficit, which was not available at the time of producing the papers. Due to these changes, the revenue contribution to capital budget in Appendix 1A and B for 2022-23 has been revised downwards from 1.825 million to 1.616 million, a net decrease of 209,000. Therefore, the net budget requirement has also decreased by the same amount from 33.689 million to 33.480 million. That's the end of my presentation. Happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions? Goodness gracious. Okay. When you're calculating all these figures and with inflation, and today we've seen inflation increase to 5.5%, will that have a dreadful outcome for this authority?
In some cases where we were aware of increases, for example, utilities, we've tried to factor it in, and as members who were present at the member challenge process would have seen that we did a one-off kind of growth bid for utilities. In all honesty, I think it will have an impact in terms of what we're seeing in terms of our services and contracts that are being renegotiated and so forth. But we are looking and working with procurement closely to ensure that we mitigate that risk as best as we can. But I think once we see a full year's worth of costs, they'll be reflected in our future year budgets.
As you know, we did a lot of work and very thankful for the cross-party work we did to increase our council tax precept. And we do thank the MPs as well for their work with it, because I think we all worked incredibly well. We worked as a team to get this increase. I think we're all very aware about the problems, the financial problems that we're all going to have to endure over the next few years. And I do hope that you would agree agree the recommendations on page 33. But before I put those forward, the Chief Fire Officer would like to say some words.
Thank you, Chairman. I think points I would make is firstly to pick up that actually before members vote the increase in precept, there are a lot of areas of deprivation in Buckinghamshire and Milton Keynes. Actually, the £5 will make quite a significant effect on some people's budgets, and we need to bear that in mind. I think, though, what we also need to bear in mind is, following the discussion that we've just had from the HMIC FRS report, is the need for any further increases in funding to be spent appropriately and properly. And we need to get every single thing that we possibly can out of that extra precept, should members choose to vote for it. We have a members' workshop scheduled in the diary coming up, and I think there's something about taking a longer term view of the increase in the precept. And the discussion with members later on should include as a basis the thought processes and the recommendations in the HMIC FRS report, and try to answer over the next 2 to 3 years the question about the resilience of the model that we currently employ, but also the resilience in terms of the longer term view in terms of some of the property assets that the authority currently has. So there is an issue that we need to plan should members vote for the £5, but I think for me is that we need to look at the longer term view on that. And if members are minded to vote for the £5, then we need to ensure that we squeeze every single bit of efficiency out of that extra funding should members vote for it today.
I think we all totally agree with you. And I'm sure that Mr. Hemmings will make sure that we do squeeze every penny out of it, along with Mr. Hussain. We do go then, therefore, to the recommendations on page 33 with the additional sentence that you have put. Councillor Britton, sorry, Mr. Britton.
Sorry, I was just going to suggest that we do it in the traditional way by
Yes.
recorded vote, but I don't know if...
I don't think we need a recorded vote. Are we happy to take this as a vote? Okay. Sorry, okay, fine. When I looked around before, there was no hand up, and then all of a sudden there was a forest. Okay. Can't take you anywhere. Okay. Can we then start? So I'll take you along, Councillor Lambert. And
Thank you.
Councillor Marland and Councillor Darlington and Councillor Stuttery. Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you, Mark Asif and the team, Marcus and the team, for everything you've done to pull all this together in what has been for several months. Will it, won't it? Will it, won't it? And the recognition that the lower quartile can have this preset flexibility is something we have argued for so many years, because we can see and we felt the constraints of that restrictive budgeting type process, but also as the cost of operating the service has continued, it has pushed us, into the position of being one of the lowest preceptors, still delivering an outstanding service in my view, and then get us to that point of saying we really need to do something else. The release, therefore, of the 600,000 that we had put together in the plans for a referendum, should we need to do so, was a sharp intake of breath from all of us that were looking at that, because we had to do something, as it were. So I'm glad that we can release that back into the funds over the plan period. The additional funding, as we have spoken about formally and informally over so many months, maybe years, does mean that we can, as the Chief Fire Officer was pointing out, look at our resourcing plan, look at our recruitment, look at what we do, and also, as Asif pointed out, move, and Marcus pointed out, move revenue to capital so that we can invest in our assets, not just the big red things, but also the buildings and everything else that goes along with that, and to deliver a much improved, better responsive type and resilient service. So for me, looking at this, I will be voting for the recommendations, and I would hope that the government also look at us again next year and say, and you can have another one like they did to Thames Valley Police, twice or so over to do that. I think the impact of such a financial change on us is probably more significant than elsewhere, because of the way that we operate and the model that we have. It is exceptionally efficient and lean in very many respects. But for me, it gives us a golden opportunity to really invest in our people and our assets. And okay, it's come to us at the last moment, and so we're going to have to develop those plans or redevelop those plans to do that recruitment and to make sure that we get that right, to make sure the capital plan starts to get right and we can readdress some of the work we've had to put on hold or delay for that work. I've heard what Mr. Parr was saying earlier on about our assets and people. I've taken it on board entirely. So for me, absolutely, we need this funding. It has to happen, and all that we can do to get the best sweating of that £1.1 million out of it, the better. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Councillor Marland.
Thank you, Chair. If I were you and you were that way inclined, I would pop down to the newsagent and buy a lottery ticket, because I think you've won it. Because the ability to be able to precept an extra £5 has dug the Fire Authority out of what was looking like a financial black hole. And I don't think it would be remiss of me to state that part of that black hole was your predecessors' choices, because we do exist on a political authority and it is a political decision that is in front of us, and it would be redress of me to say that part of the problem with the finances of the authority is that this authority decided to cut council tax rather than freeze it or increase it, and therefore in some ways we would still be in the I believe we would still be in the bottom quartile of authorities. We would be able to precept £5 but we would be at a much stronger base to be able to do so. And some of the points that Councillor Lambert just made about lack of investment in capital, that's because actually capital has to be shifted in some respects to revenue, and we've used reserves to balance off the budget in the past, and therefore I would absolutely go and make sure that you have your name on the Euro Millions on Friday. In saying that, we will support this budget because having the precept is the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do that on a cross-party basis. We asked for it. It will be interesting to see tonight whether some councillors that support a near 10% increase in the precept for this authority go back to their home authorities and support a 3.75% increase for similar financial constraints. But what I will say, and I think it's quite helpful that Mr. Parr is in the room, is that it is about putting the authority on notice. I think for too long, and in some ways even what Councillor Lambert said reiterated this, the model has been hidden behind. We are an efficient model, but I think now is the time to ask the question about whether that is a chicken and egg situation. Do we have a lean model, and have we been pushed down the lean model route because of the financial constraints of the authority? Or is that model the right thing and the right thing to do? Or, in reality, the balance is probably somewhere in the middle. And I think that's what Mr. Parr said, is that actually some of the things that the authority do are innovative, and some of them are done because of financial constraints, and probably wouldn't be done if there was other options. And I think it would be wrong to say the model is great and the model is the best thing that can happen, and we just need to squeeze a bit more out of it. I think fundamentally my concern has always been when you're an outlier, some of those things that you outlie on will be good because it's innovative, and some of those things that you outlie on are just a risk too far, and you risk that, and I think we've touched on it before, you risk that catastrophic failure of it's fine until it isn't, and you will only get one chance in this sort of environment. You will only get one chance where it isn't. There will only be one day where there are 4 major incidents and one cannot be attended, and I think that ultimately is why we will support this today, but we do so on the basis that there is, as I think the wheel turns, and as I think the leadership will be in a position to review this, whether the model is the right model, whether there are aspects within that that can change, and whether actually we reduce the dependency on the goodwill of our firefighters and build a bit more robustness in the system. And I will also just randomly put one marker down. I've sat on this fire authority for, I think it's 8 years now, and I signed letters to ministers very clearly on the basis that we would use this precept to avert closing fire stations. I think it would be a little bit Schrodinger's budget if we vote for a £5 council tax. We vote for the £5 plus the other precept increase, because it's not just £5, and then be told, well, actually, some of those stations are surplus to requirements and we need to close them anyway. So I will put down a marker that we are not voting for the idea that some of those fire stations are surplus to requirements. And because it's a very interesting, and I've often fallen into this trap as a council leader myself. Let's do this for this reason, and then suddenly the reason why you've done it becomes the reason to do the thing that you were trying to avoid in the first place, and that is certainly not something we would support.
I thank you for that. As you know, we have a members' workshop in March, 23rd of March, and it's going to be up in your area. And I believe that everything you said are things that we have to look at. We worked as a team to get the extra increase, and I hope that we do support that. And I do think that we have to look at how we go forward. And I think you can't level at anyone decisions that were made in the past for what they are, because those decisions were made at those times. We don't know why they were, just like any decision that your council would make that we would question years later. But I do take on board exactly what you say. I hope that when we have that member workshop, that we will all sit there and we will make sure that we do become innovative and we don't rely on the goodwill of everybody doing that extra, because that's not what this is about. And we also would need to know, and we also need to make sure that members of the public are aware that we're providing a service that is for their safety. And I do hope that you will take that on board. And I do accept what you've said. I think everybody around this room agrees with what you've actually put forward. So thank you. We'll move on. Councillor Darlington.
So I just wanted to start with reiterating Councillor Hopkins' statement previously that the financial situation is one of the Fire Authority's own making from decisions that were made in the past that were wrong, and actually have left this authority not just underfunded, but in a precarious position if there were to be several major incidents, and has also, as Mr. Parr's report outlines, has meant that there hasn't been the kind of 360 focus on things like prevention, which are really, really important. I also recognise what Jason was saying about how difficult, and the cost of living, that the issues that are happening right now, and how difficult it is for people. And while we absolutely need the additional funding here, that needs to be seen by the people who are going to be paying it. That means that funding, from my perspective, and I know we're going to have an away day, but that funding absolutely needs to make those improvements into the service, as you've highlighted, but also those improvements to visibility. Most of all, picking up Stephen's point earlier, the improvement in our recruitment and retention, and, as Pete said, not always relying on goodwill, because our most powerful asset, whether it's prevention or response, are the very people at the front line. And so from my perspective, I do think we need this. It's a shame that it's coming at a time, couldn't be a worse time for our residents for this to be hitting them with, given everything else that is going up at the same time, and from inflation to energy bills to everything. But we do need it in order to maintain the safety of our residents. So, as Peter said, we will be supporting it. But again, just in terms of priorities ahead of the 23rd, and I'm glad this will be the major agenda item on the 23rd about how we move forward, that we've got to invest in our frontline firefighters. Absolutely. They are our biggest asset, and they are what the residents would expect us to do.
I think you say everything that we agree with. And I think when you say about prevention is key to the service, and it has been. It always has. We'll move on to Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you very much. I listened to what's been said, and the reality is we are where we are because of a political choice. And we're going to have a chance to make a political choice today. The political choice in 2015 was the wrong choice. Today we'll be making the right choice, as painful as that's going to be for the economics of hard-pressed constituents, because not to make that choice would result in an impossible situation of where we couldn't offer a service which they anticipate to be provided. Now, I think we have to recognise that the decisions taken in the past were wrong. That was taken during an election period and a prior to an election period. This, fortunately, isn't in an election period, so we're looking at this properly in a sensible manner. I do echo the thoughts here, is that we do need to be assured that in agreeing this, as Councillor Mallon said, that this isn't a later date that we'll be then discussing to find resources about different fire stations, because it was obvious there was mention to it in the report previously, and there was mention to that. Now, if we're going to discuss that, we could all divide and have some decent, good discussions and arguments. But we are where we are. I think we need to actually do the communication with the public about this is key, because I see this increases retaining staff, retaining fire crews, retaining appropriate equipment, and retaining the ability to deliver services. I regret that we are in the financial state as a nation at the point with all the other things, and this is the wrong time for the rise, but it is the right rise, and it is needed. So on that basis, I would support it, but unless we recognise why we did things wrong in the past and why we did them, we'll do them again. And the rush to move to the vote before we have a chance to discuss is part of it. We have to be talking more, Chairman, and we have to listen more to each other. So that's my views, and I'm quite welcome to be disagreed with or shared with them, quite frankly.
Thank you. When I first mentioned that we would go to the recommendation, nobody put their hand up, and I have been looking for that. So don't accuse me of not wanting a debate on this. Don't come back. Also, the decisions that were made in the past were made for the reasons that were there. I don't know what they were, and to level those at being political, I think, is unjust. I believe it was during a period of austerity that that decision was made. And I understand now also that we are in another situation of austerity. We didn't expect to be today where we are. We didn't expect a pandemic. And it is one of those unfortunate things that we do need to have the increase in our precept to provide the service that we need to provide. We have worked together across the political divide to get this. So you can't just level that this is what we should be doing because of. And I do take that that is an issue that you have raised. We didn't know there was going to be a pandemic. None of us did. None of us knew that. And it has left this country, you know, financially and economically wanting. So I'll go on to Councillor Hall, and then Councillor Hopkins, and then we'll come to a debate, to the end of the debate. And I've been handed a little note here that says statutory guidance in standing orders require the budget to be a recorded vote. Okay, so Councillor Hall, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I tend to agree with you that the benefit of hindsight is a wonderful thing. It's something that I don't profess to have, so I would never criticise previous members who make decisions based on this criteria and the information they have in front of them at the time. I think that's very, very unfair. Mr. Parr mentioned the focus in the report around cracks, and I think the cracks really appear because we are underfunded. We've all recognised that. So that is why I'm going to support the £5 increase. I think it's the only sensible thing to do, and it's something that I can look members of the public in the eye and actually justify. I'm actually feeling very, very positive about our away day on the 23rd of March. Any body like this has to evolve. You can't just be stuck and then carry on doing things because you've always done them that way. And I think all of us together brainstorming and looking at ways to take the service forward for a sensible involvement that is actually going to be beneficial to the public. I think it's going to be an excellent thing for us to do, and I'm hoping that we're actually cross-party going to come up with some very, very good ideas to drive this service forward and make it fit for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hopkins.
I'll be very brief, Chair, and I welcome all the comments that have been made. I haven't disagreed with any of them. I think it in many ways, it underlines the point I was trying to make earlier to Mr. Parr, that we need to challenge, we need to move forward. I would remind Pete that we recently closed 2 fire stations. We closed a fire station at Great Holme in Milton Keynes. We closed a fire station in Bletchley in Milton Keynes. We did it for exactly the right reason, because we opened the hub in Milton Keynes and we provided, hopefully, a more cost-efficient, a more delivery service-efficient solution for Milton Keynes. So we can examine and we can look at closures in certain instances, certainly in Milton Keynes, that actually improve the level of service that we have delivery to the people that we represent. And it's an unfortunate but true thing to say that in every element of the public sector, in local government as well, that we unfortunately rely on the goodwill of social workers, of teachers, of highways engineers, of the waste team, etc., to deliver our services to the level we expect, because people working for the authority take pride in delivering the services that they're doing. And it's much the same in the fire authority as well. So it's an unfortunate fact of life, but it's a reality. And we're none the poorer for it in many ways. Obviously, I support the recommendations here this evening for very obvious reasons. I think the principle of it is correct, but I'm very mindful of Councillor Darlington's point that we live in a time where inflation now is 5.5%. Energy costs are going through the roof. People are really, really feeling the pinch. So we have to be very mindful of that moving forward. And that's why we need to improve our efficiency, and we need to get more from the money that we're raising from the people we represent. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. With the addition of that sentence that you wanted on the recommendation on page 33, and as already stated, statutory guidance and the standing orders require budgets to be a recorded vote. We will be having a recorded vote. Mr. Britton.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll do a roll call by surname, alphabetical order. And if members, when their name is called, can indicate whether they vote for, against, or abstain. Councillor Bagg.
For.
Carroll. For. Chappell.
For.
Clark. For. Darlington. For. Exon.
For.
Hall.
For.
Hopkins. For. Lambert.
For.
Marland.
For.
McLean. For. Rankin.
For.
Stutchbury.
For.
Waite.
For.
Walsh.
For.
That's unanimous, Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed. And as I said before, every penny of that increase will have to have the pip squeaked.
Absolutely, Chairman.
We go on now to agenda item 9C, which is members' allowances. Last year we agreed not to put our allowances up. However, this year I think that we do need to have the discussion on whether it's a 0 increase in allowances or 1.5 increase in allowances. I will hand over to Mr. Britton to explain the rationale.
Thank you, Chairman, members. I won't add any editorial to the report. I'll just canter through the salient points. As a standalone fire and rescue authority, the authority has a wide discretion in adopting an annual scheme of allowances. The main proviso is that the authority must have regard to the recommendations of the independent remuneration panels of its 2 constituent councils. This report was considered by the Executive Committee, and it is at pages 47 to 102 of your agenda packs. The recommendations of the Council's independent remuneration panels are at Appendices A and B, which are at pages 51 to 87 of the agenda pack. As set out in the Executive Summary of the cover report at page 47, the scheme of allowances has been linked to the NJC Grey Book Annual Pay Award for firefighters since 2012. The application of this index linking had been endorsed annually by the authority until 2021. Although there had been a Grey Book 2% pay award effective from the 1st of July 2020, the authority agreed in February 2021 to suspend the indexation for the year 21-22, resulting in a 0% increase in members' allowances. If the link to the Grey Book were to be reinstated for 22-23, this would result in an increase of 1.5%. A draft proposed scheme of allowances for the year 22 to 23 is appended as Appendix C, which is at pages 89 to 101 of the agenda pack, and shows in the alternative the effect of a 1.5% increase from the current financial year. Regulations require that the authority makes a scheme providing for the payment of a basic allowance to each member of the authority, which must be the same for every member of the authority, irrespective of political party. The scheme of allowances reflects the requirements in the regulations that allow members to individually elect to forego entitlements or any part of their entitlement to the allowances by giving notice to the specified officer. The relevant paragraphs of the scheme of allowances are quoted at the top of page 48 of the cover report as a reminder that if the authority approves an increase, individual members retain a personal choice to decline to receive an increase in any allowance. The Executive Committee has put forward alternative options for the authority to agree, either a 0% increase or a 1.5% increase, the latter being based on index linking to last year's Grey Book Pay Award. Unless I can assist any further, the recommendation is at page 7 of the agenda pack. Thank you, Chairman.
There are no hands up. Oh, I thought you would. Councillor Lambert.
Thank you, Chairman. So last year there was an exception, but the report in there also for Buckinghamshire Council relates to a time when the council didn't actually exist. It was in its shadow form at the time, and many would argue now that the new council is in being that actually the allowance scheme isn't fit for purpose, and my understanding is that's going to be raised at other places because it's not fit for purpose for the amount of work that that particular unitary council does. I can't speak for the members of Milton Keynes unitary council, obviously, but my understanding is, and having read the reports, of course, I understand where their scheme sits. For me, we always had a principle in this authority. I would always say, principles, in this context can change, of course, with the light of everything that's going on. Last year we didn't take the increase, but previously we have always pegged against the Grey Book. We've always pegged against what the general staff population were getting to make sure that there wasn't that difficult differential that when you did have to correct to get to the level that the independent remuneration panels for the other two constituent authorities got to, that you didn't have this massive step up, this massive change, and then this terrible position where just in order to make it work, you've got to vote for something that makes it look absolutely dreadful. The use of percentages, of course, in such a small percentage of what this actual allowance looks like, makes it sound also horrifically large at 1.5%. It really isn't. It doesn't constitute very much in cash terms at all to the authority or to the individual, more so to the individual. So for me, my thinking, I would love to hear what colleagues have to say on this, but for me and my thinking is that we should go back to the pegging, which for me would be option B, and to remain it at that. I don't mind the same options coming back year on year, so that we can look, has there been an exceptional circumstance this year, and then we can make that consideration. So, but for me, I would put it back to the pegging. We're reaching normal, whatever normal life ever is, but in terms of the national picture, and we're also facing this kind of weird 6, 9, 12 months worth of economic strangeness. None of us have got the crystal ball on that. So I would just, for now, I'd put it back to where it was and then look at that situation again next year, as we should every year. So for me, it would be option B. Thank you.
Thank you. The other thing that you also would allow, if whichever one that we decide on, it's a member choice whether they take the allowance or whether they don't. So thank you very much. Do we have any other hands up? No? Okay. We go to the recommendation then on page 47 that the authority...
Just in terms of clarification to Mr. Britton, what are we deciding? Because surely somebody has to move a proposition and somebody has to second it. We have to vote on it. Is the chair proposing A or B?
I think Chairman, it's from what Councillor Lambert is saying, I think he'd be prepared to move option B. So if we had a seconder for that, we could put that one to the vote.
Do we have a seconder for Councillor Lambert's proposal? Thank you. Councillor Exon and Councillor McLean.
Well, as the lead member for People, of course, it now falls to me, of course. Thank you for that hot potato in my lap, Madam Chairman.
Sorry, I see a massive bird trap on your foot there.
Sorry.
Oh, I would have thought Councillor Exon. Thank you. Do you want to add any more to your eloquence before?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. No.
A show of hands, Chairman, for option B.
Could we show of hands for a...
Yeah, that's actually unanimous, Chairman.
And could I add that the Conservative group have made the decision that they will not take the 1.5% increase in their answers? Do you need us to individually write to you to tell you that, or will you accept that as a unit?
I think in due course, if we could have that notification, Chairman, just mindful that there may be a change in the composition of the authority at the annual meeting, and yeah.
Councillor Hall.
Chairman, could the Conservative group be asked to indicate their wishes by a show of hands that they won't take the increase?
Chair,
Point of order.
Shall
we all go home now?
Conservative group business is a
we all
matter
go
for the
now? Wash
Conservative
our
group.
washing in. Could you wash your washing in private, please?
Excuse me.
Chairman, as we
No.
will have a new authority in June, so you can't really bind. We don't know what members might be on the authority next year. So the current opinions of the members are noted.
I thought that that's what we'd actually agreed before. So, yes, Councillor Chappell.
Chairman, I recognise that we're sitting in this room, we're recorded, we're going out on the web, I think, and therefore everything that is said is recorded, and we've said quite openly that the Conservatives will not be taking the increase when the time of the increase is extended. We're bound by that, and I don't see why we need to write in individually to just verify what we've done.
I think it's one of those conversations when we come to the new year that will be had, and I'm sure all groups will talk to their own groups about that. Yes, Councillor Sutcliffe.
I believe that all of you are capable of writing. I believe you all recognise the paperwork. I believe that the unanimity of decisions lasted about 20 minutes. I believe that Councillor Lambert has walked into a bear trap, and I believe you had a lovely meeting beforehand. So on that basis, please write your own letters and do your own washing in private, and we'll read that.
Thank you very much indeed for your comments. I do not agree that Councillor Lambert walked into a bear trap, and I think that's most unjust. We'll move on to agenda item 11, which is on page 161. And Mr. Lambert, would you like to take us through that?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm now checking my feet aren't stuck in something. So I'm going to hand over to Faye Mansfield, who an exceptional officer in my view, who has guided us for I want to say 5 years through this particular piece of work. I'm not going to steal any of her thunder whatsoever, but I did look at page 175 and put my thumbs up. Yep, thank you very much. I'm very happy with that direct travel. That's all I'm going to say now, but I'd hand over to the amazing Faye Mansfield. Thank you.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. So the pay policy is required to be updated each financial year, and it's being presented today for approval as the 2022-23 pay policy for the authority, which will be effective from the 1st of April 22. The pay policy is based on the current 21-22 pay policy and has been updated with minor amendments made where appropriate, as detailed in red and underlined or struck through where deleted. Looking at the specific sections of the pay policy and the pay multiples and ratio of highest to lowest pay, it continues to fall for the 10th year running, which is really positive. This seeing the 10th year ratio improving again from 2 years from the previous year and by 30% since first reporting in 2012. Apart from the yearly updates of figures, the only other changes made within the 2022 pay policy is the removal of reference to the exit payment cap in section 12 of the policy, which is titled Payment on Termination of Employment. In November 2020, the restrictions of public sector exit payment regulations came into force and was detailed within the Pay Policy 21-22. However, in February 21, Treasury published a Treasury direction disapplying the parts of the regulations which implemented a 95,000 cap on public sector exit payments and the restriction of public sector exit payment revocation regulations 2021. The revocation regulations was placed before Parliament and came into force, formally revoking the 2020 regulations on the 19th of May 21. The revocation regulations contained a legal obligation for employers to make termination payments to employees with an exit date in the period the regulations applied, which is from the 4th of November 2020 to the 11th of February 21, for the authority where there were no employees impacted by the exit payment cap. Since the revocation regulations, the government continues to discuss exit payments and the importance of delivering value for money for the taxpayer. It is anticipated that an exit payment cap or similar will be reintroduced in some form, and the authority will contribute to any government consultation process as appropriate, and thereafter would wait any details on regulation changes and implementation dates. Thank you. Are there any questions?
Thank you. I think we have a lot of problems being that we're so close to London, and with the recent declaration of the London Fire Brigade offering more money, because I know that they're very short of drivers. Do you see that that might impact this authority with members of staff leaving?
Quite potentially.
Yeah, I can come now. Thank you, Chairman. On that specific question, yes, London Fire Brigade have been recruiting recently and advertising quite widely, and they do pay London weighting, which is some 20% more than we currently pay our firefighters. So there is a risk to the authority. We've included that now on our risk register because we are aware of a number of staff that are considering or maybe have even applied in that respect. So yeah, it is of concern to us when London Fire Brigade do this because of our proximity to London, as other services that surround London feel the same as well. So it is something that we've got a close eye on, but it comes back to, I think, the discussions we had earlier around recruitment and how we push forward with that. But it is a concern. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Osborne. Mr. Lambert, do you want to add any more to this report?
I don't, Chairman, no. There is nothing more to add to it, and the report stands for itself. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. The recommendation is on page 161. Oh, sorry, Councillor Sutchbury.
That's fine, and I'm always sorry myself. The basic principle of exit payments is to remunerate somebody for something they've done in terms of their terms of employment and conditions. It would seem unjust and unfair because that can cover a multitude of situations that we focus on another authority's recruitment policy when making this decision. It's an employment right. It's something that somebody's earned through previous conditions, and we should honour that. Nobody in upper tier responsibilities in the country ever worries about taking their payments for exit payments for largely paid jobs, and some of these payments wouldn't be large amounts of money, and it could be through for health issues, stressing work or something else. So we must honour that, because if we don't value the people we employ, we are nothing.
Well said. Recommendations on page 161. There are 2 of them. The pay policy principles and statement as set out in Appendix 1 as the statutory pay policy statement for 2022 or 2023 is approved for publication. And 2, the authority notes the pay multiple ratio continues to fall for the 10th year running, with the 10th year period seeing the ratio improved by 30% since 2012. Are we agreed? Thank you. We go to agenda item 12. Councillor Hopkins.
Sorry, Chair, just a couple of things on this before I bring in Marcus. I was going to say that Stephen's obviously set a precedent here by explaining what an outstanding officer Faye Mansfield is, and I want to just echo that by saying the Treasury team, Asif, gentlemen on the screen at the moment, Mark, are even more fantastic, and really and truthfully, we're very, very lucky to have them. This report, Chairman, is very much what I always consider to be the three I's, which is inflation, interest rates and investment. Over to you.
Mr. Hussey.
Thank you, Councillor Hopkins, for your kind words. Today I'll be presenting you with the Treasury Management Strategy for 22-23, which includes a statement in relation to the Treasury Management Policy, the Treasury Management Strategy and Annual Investment Strategy. This paper also supports the medium-term financial plan, which has already been presented at today's meeting. There are no significant changes from the previous strategy, and we are still operating with a higher liquidity than we would have done previously. However, I want to highlight members' attention to the following. In May 2022, the authority has a long-term loan due for repayment. This repayment does not directly impact the revenue budgets, and funds have been set aside to ensure we can pay this loan when due. Also, during the first week of February 2022, you may be aware that the Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee voted 5-4 to increase the base rate by 0.25 percentage points to 0.5%, with the minority 4 preferring to increase the base rate by 0.5 percentage points to 0.75%. Which leads me on to the budget set for 22-23. You will notice that the proposed investment income budget for 22-23 remains at 30,000, and the reason for this is because we have a number of investments that were made prior to the last 2 base rate increases and are maturing during 22-23. Therefore, we will not see the true benefit of the base rate increases for the full year, and it's not prudent to increase the budget without knowing if the interest rates are going to continue at a stable rate. Any additional income above the set budget will be welcome, and if the investment income is sustainable for future years, this will be reflected as part of the next MTFP, Medium-Term Financial Plan. During 22-23, we will continue to monitor the Treasury Management performance, and this will be reported at O&A Committee. Thank you, and happy to take any questions.
Councillor Morland.
Thank you. As somebody who sits on the Books Pension Committee, it's something that's raised on a consistent basis, is the strategy in terms of investment into climate change and the impact of investments on climate change. And again, it's something that's been raised on this authority and closed down on this authority on a number of occasions. I don't see anywhere within the Treasury Management Strategy the impact on climate change of those investments, and it's just something that I would flag as a miss, and I would hope that in future the authority looks at the investment schedule and decides not to invest in fossil fuel companies or those that promote or impact on the climate.
You raise a very good point. Can I hand over to Mr. Hemmings?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Marden, for that point. Within the Environment and Climate Action Plan that was approved by the authority last December, one of the things we wanted to look at during the coming year was looking at sustainable investments. It's been raised previously when we're looking at Treasury Management Strategy, and historically they haven't had the same kind of security that more traditional investments have had. However, that is now starting to change. There are some now sustainable investment products that have the same kind of security, liquidity and similar yields to more traditional investment products. So that's something we're going to be investigating during the current year I will bring back a proposal for next year's Treasury Management Strategy to have a look at.
Are you happy with that?
Yeah, and I also quite understand that in terms of investment portfolio, green energy companies, green companies tend to be on the more riskier side, but obviously higher risk, more reward. If you'd have bought a couple of shares in Tesla a few years ago, we wouldn't have had to raise the precept by £5.
That was unfair. That was a little bit below the belt, I think. I really do. I think that was a really bit naughty. Any other questions for Mr. Hussey? I'll get you back later. No more questions. Okay, the recommendation is on page 183, which is the authority approves the Treasury Management Policy Statement, the Treasury Management Strategy Statement, and the Annual Investment Strategy for 2022-23. Agreed? Thank you. We go on to agenda item 13. Mr. Lambert, would you like to start this off, please? And I believe that Mr. Cunningham's going to be joining us by Teams. Mr. Lambert.
Sure. Hello. Sorry, I thought it was Callum. Sorry. I think you don't look like Callum to me. In a good way for both of you. Anyway, so I'm really pleased.
Are you with us?
I am, Madam Chairman. I am.
Good.
I'm definitely with us, playing the team part, as you do as a member of this authority. Anyhow, saying that and being a bit cheeky there about playing a team part, this is an exceptional piece of work by this authority and by the officers of this authority, and recognised in the award that we got last year, but also truly playing our part for those that have played their part. And I think that really says something about us as an authority, elected members and officers alike. So I'm really pleased to see this paper here today, and I'm not going to add anything more to it because I'm sure Sean has a really good piece to explain more detail around the report, and I'm proud of Bucks Fire for this. So Sean, thank you.
Sean,
brilliant. Yeah, Chairman, thanks very much, and members of our authority, and Councillor Lambert, thanks for what you said there, because I'm immensely proud of what we've done, and even your words made me feel a little bit emotional just then. But I'm going to start just with a testimony from a member of the Veterans Community Network, if I may. Asking for help can be tough, especially for those who have served their country and are more comfortable protecting and supporting others rather than asking for it for themselves. The fire station walk-ins provide a uniformed, familiar environment for veterans who either don't know how to ask for help, don't know what help is available, or are not sure they deserve it. Buckinghamshire Fire Rescue Service have worked hard to make these sessions completely accessible, welcoming, and provide a safe space to provide the right support to those who have served. That's a testimony from somebody from the Veteran Community Network, particularly around the walk-in centres that are based at West Ashlands. We have another walk-in centre based at Marlow Fire Station, all in partnerships with people like Ops Courage from the NHS, DWP, Veterans Welfare, SAFA, British Legion, Royal Air Force Association. We've got a myriad of partners that work with us. They're deliberately being kept low key, so apologies if you don't see it advertised everywhere. It's really important. Some of the people that turn up literally decide on the day they're coming for help, and if the car park's busy or it looks too busy, they will drive off. We've literally grabbed the people as they've walked past at Marlow. Someone's been walking up and down past the station, and we had to go and approach them. And yes, they are there. They're all ready to go, but their needs are that complex. So they've been really well received, and the footfall is low, but that should be expected. But both of those centres are working really well. So I think that's the biggest sort of champion I can say for the work we do at the moment. Another area that we're doing really well, and this a big praise to Albury Fire Stations and also a key member of headquarters staff, have developed a programme of events for the Armed Forces cadets, which is it's almost like an off-the-shelf that we can take around the county and out to other stations, but trialled first at Aylesbury Fire Station. The feedback from that's been amazing. We're bringing fire cadets on the station, introduce them to what fire station life is like, but also giving them a chance to drill somewhere else, do something else, and even it helps them towards their Duke of Edinburgh awards. So that's really good work as well. Some of the other things on the periphery that we do, we always show our support for the armed forces on Remembrance Parades, and that's by attending local ones and holding remembrance parades and just holding that sort of memorial piece on Armistice Day outside the front of the stations. Providing a safe place for one-to-one clinical meetings, I found it unbelievable. Sometimes the Armed Forces Veterans Welfare Society want to have a meeting with a veteran, but they don't have anywhere to have that meeting. They meet in car parks or sit in cars. We can provide a safe place. We've got plenty of room that we can provide that, and that's happened on a few times. And I suppose also one big thing for us as well is vacancies. We know we've been recruiting across the organisation, not just frontline firefighter staff, but there's some really good people out there that are leaving the forces. So we're now able to have platforms to advertise our vacancies, forces family jobs, the career transition pathway. We've even put a piece in a magazine called Civvy Street Magazine, which is aimed at those people that are leaving. So that's really, really good stuff with us. But it's reciprocal as well, working within the armed forces community. We recently held a training event at the reserve forces in Marlow because we couldn't form them because of COVID restrictions, and they charged us a minimal fee, whereas we were looking at being charged quite a lot for a conference centre. And also mental health first aid training, that's being offered at a cost price and free for some staff as well. So, and that's great for our service because we can use that skill within service. And finally, I'd just like to draw your attention to the papers, just so a bit more information for yourselves. On the back page of the paper, I've just put a couple of links. One's to the Veterans Community Network, which do a great deal of work around the Milton Keynes area, and the other one is NHS Op Courage, just to give you a bit more information around that. Firefighter members, councillors, thanks very much for your time, and happy to take any questions.
I would just like to thank you for from the chairman of the High Wycombe British Legion, they use the High Wycombe station and they find it very, very useful for their members, so thank you for that. Are there any points to raise or any questions? Sorry, Councillor Marland and then Councillor Stutchbury.
Sorry, Chair. Just to point out that I think this is a great bit of work. I'm proud, being leader of Milton Keynes Council, that we're a gold employer, and having just had a brief off-mic conversation with Councillor Lambert, Milton Keynes Council does share as a specific officer for the Armed Forces Covenant with Bedfordshire and Central Bedfordshire, and it's something that the officers might want to take up with Milton Keynes and those authorities to see if Bucksfire might want to join in that shared officer position to help drive this forward for this authority.
Thank you very much indeed for that. Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you very much. It's really positive we do these things. Last night I was sat talking to my 82-year-old mother who was asking me questions about my grandfather's service in the Second World War. There was nothing for that generation, particularly when they came back. None of these types of things to support them. They were pretty much left on their own. It's really positive that we're doing things. I mean, grandfather had the privilege of walking across France, being shot at by just about everybody, and eventually did get shot, and thankfully he survived. But I think the fact that saying that isn't jocular, it's the fact is that people who get injured in conflict and have to live with the consequences of those injuries and how they deal with them. It's important we do support them. We shouldn't sell ourselves through it. We should sell the purpose of what it is, which is, I think, politically agreed that it's a good thing. But we must carry on supporting these things because conflicts occur. The next generation will be have their conflicts, and hopefully not, but that's always seems to be in this history of this country. And people do show with stress from injury and war late on in life when they get, I think they call it SPD, it comes back and can really interfere with the way they relate to their families, the way they relate to employment, and the way they manage their own personal life. You only have to see that with the amount of homeless people who are ex-military in the country. Nationally, it's a scandal. It's nothing we caused individually, but these sort of things do help people get back on their feet. So, I mean, we continue with this. It's a good thing.
It's somewhere to be listened to. And somewhere safe to be listened to. That's what. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Cunningham, for your report. On page
Thank you.
199, the action and the recommendation for us is this report be noted. Agreed. We go to page 203, which is item 14, and this is the composition of the authority. And I'll hand over to Mr. Britton.
Thank you, Chairman, members. The constituent councils appoint members onto the authority annually at their respective meetings in May each year. The statutory instrument requires this to be done proportionately based on the relative numbers of local government electors in each council's area. The data point used for this is always the Register of Local Government Electors, published on the 1st of December in the preceding year separately by those councils. However, following a recommendation of the authority, officers started in 2015 to use the Office for National Statistics data sets. Although based on the same 1st of December data points, the ONS was publishing the information later each year, with the effect that last year, the 1st December 2020 figures were not published by the ONS until after the 2021 annual meeting of Milton Keynes Council. The only ONS figures available in time last year were the interim figures based on the 2nd of March 2020 local government registers, which resulted in an 11:6 ratio rather than a 12:5 ratio if the December 2020 figures had been used. To remove the uncertainty this year, officers have reverted to using the source information, and it is proposed to continue to do this in future years. The recommendation, Chairman and members, is at page 203, which reflects the information provided by the respective electoral services teams cited on pages 204 and 205 of the report. Chairman, that concludes my report.
Thank you. I have to say I'm staggered at the fall in the numbers that we have on this report. Last year, Milton Keynes was down as 204,465, and this year you've gone down to 195,827. I just wonder where you might be hiding those people. And Buckinghamshire has also gone down just over 1,000. So I just am questioning some of these figures. It just seems weird. Councillor Darlington?
I agree with you, Chair. And you know, as Mr. Britton has just said, he's using, you said interim figures?
Chairman,
No.
they were interim figures for last year's calculation. Which
but knowing what we know about our population, and also given the fact that given how it's literally, what, 0.02%, does seem to be making, why, you know, we're just going to have to make a reverse change next year. Why aren't we just saying, actually, it makes sense just to keep it as it is? I guess I understand what you're saying, and I understand, you know, but as we're questioning the data, you know, from Buck side and MK side questioning the data, why would we bother, you know, why would we lessen the voice of MK if we're not confident about these figures?
The electoral registration officers from both those councils are very confident of the figures, and if we had have used the 1st of December 2020 figures of last year, the switch would have been made last year. The governing instrument of the authority is very clear. Members are appointed proportionate to local government electorates. Those figures from the respective councils' election teams they're convinced they're robust. So I don't think there's any questioning of the veracity of those figures. The actual science behind why people choose to put their name onto the electoral roll, that's probably a whole separate conversation.
Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I agree entirely with what Councillor Darlington says. It beggars belief. I mean, my ward is one of the fastest growing wards in one of the fastest growing parts of the country. I was out delivering welcome packs within the village a week or so ago, and I couldn't believe how many houses there were in the packs I delivered over the last, you know, people who moved in over the last 6 months. And yet, if you look at the electoral roll for the village, it's gone up by dozens rather than hundreds. We have a body of work to do, I think, as a local authority, and I'm sure Buckinghamshire has the same to do, to actually get people to come onto the roll. But I think Councillor Darlington makes a very good point about in 12 months' time we could well find we're faced with having to reverse the decision. But I suppose, given that the rules are the rules, then that's what you'll have to do in 12 months' time.
Well, only to agree that it won't be reversing the decision. It's the ratios are monitored annually. It's just to avoid being a hostage to fortune. When the ONS published their information, we're reverting to going back to getting the data direct from the electoral registration officers, who have that data on the 1st of December and can provide it to us in January. So we have foresight on any likely changes on those ratios.
I think we can see the issue here that, you know, the late delivery of those numbers has caused this issue. Councillor Stutchbury.
Yeah, I'm struggling with it because I live quite close to Milton Keynes, and Milton Keynes is getting quite close to me because it grows regularly every 24 hours. And there's always a discussion about its growth in a political sense. It seems that hasn't paid any dividends in additional representation yet. I think if you drive through Milton Keynes, you can, you can see the amount of growth in comparison to South Buckinghamshire is incomparable. The amount of growth in North Buckinghamshire is almost comparable. So I really think these figures are probably out of date, or there is a huge problem in Milton Keynes with people registering to vote, which is a really important issue which needs to be addressed. I'm of course known that once they register to vote, they'll all vote Labour, so it's fine. But I say that in the way it's meant. But I do think we need to get them to register to vote if that's the case. Or there's some cop with the figures don't make sense. I can't see so many estates going up when I drive through there, and all those people aren't registered. It just does not make sense. I can't see that this is correct. Can we defer this till we've had another look at it, or do we have to make the decision today? Because I think it's the wrong decision. As it's been suggested, we'll have to reverse it once the right figures are available.
The figures, Councillor Stutchbury, have been given by each council's electoral officer, so we can't question their veracity. And if, as people aren't putting their names down on the electoral roll, then, you know, unfortunately, that's what's happening. Councillor Hall. And then Councillor Marland. And then
thank you, Chairman. I mean, I can't speak for Milton Keynes, but I can certainly speak for Buckinghamshire. When I find it quite astonishing that we've gone down by 1,000 when every time you drive towards Aylesbury, another field's gone. So I find it strange. But we have to follow the criteria that's set down before us. This could have gone the other way. And in this case, it goes this way. It is what it is. It's in front of us. It's all proper and above board, and I think we have no choice but to follow the guidance. Thank you.
Councillor Marland.
Thank you. So we're talking about 600,000 people.
We're talking about an arm or a leg.
Yeah, it's 600,000 people, isn't it? So 1% is 600. So we're talking about 0.02 is 70 people or something like that. It is what it is, and I think that's the main thing. I completely agree. Councillor Hopkins did email me about this, and I think we are, as a Milton Keynes as local authority, we are actually restructuring our Democratic Services Department at the moment to cope with a number of the electoral changes that have come in, both previously and that will come in the few years' time. The biggest drop apparently was for people returning to their country of origin from the EU. Milton Keynes obviously being more of an urban conurbation than Buckinghamshire had more people who were on who had come from the EU to work, and therefore that was a bigger gap and more likely for the fall. What I would say is the long-term point is, I don't know, we've been asked a couple of times as an authority to look at the number of members on the authority, and it's a good example of where if we were to reduce the members on the authority, that the proportionality shift would have a greater impact on the total quantum of numbers itself. So I do think the numbers on the authority are right at the moment, because the difference between 6 and 5 is much greater. It would be much greater on a smaller authority than 5 and 4. And I think that that's a point worth noting, that when we are asked to look at the size of the authority, actually this size of authority is better because it does take in more of account that there will be this is going to continue forever. There will be quite a lot of, next year will be the other way, and then the year after will be another way, and actually those fluctuations are better mitigated by a slightly larger authority, but not too large.
Thank you very much. Councillor Rankin.
Yeah, I think it's right that we follow a methodology. I think the figures last year, the interim figures look wrong. I don't recognise the Milton Keynes figure of 204,500. That just doesn't compute. I think the figures this year look correct. But Councillor Darlington and Councillor Hopkins are right. Milton Keynes is a growing city, and Councillor Malloram's point out that this is a sort of within a rounding error. It does seem a bit odd that we had bad figures last year. We have decent figures this year. There's no real comparison. We have a rounding error. And I think we're going to see that the figure will go back again next year, undoubtedly, because of the growth in Milton Keynes is phenomenal. So I think there needs to be some level of pragmatism.
Councillor Chappell.
Something like this, Chairman, will always be emotive because there's a change, there's going to be winners and losers. We've got the report in front of us. It is very detailed, and I would like to second Councillor Hall and agree with the excuse me, with the report. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bagg.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Clearly this is a contentious issue, and it's not going to be a decision that is supported by those members who represent Milton Keynes. I can understand all the arguments about the numbers being small, being fine margins, and all the sort of the conjecture that the kind of the anecdotal stuff about growing city and numbers. Forget that. We follow the rules. And as Mr. Britton has said, the rules are very clear about how we do it. The source of the data is credible, and this is what the numbers say. So we follow the rules and we do what we do. We keep on following the rules, and next year it may swing the other way. And if it does, I won't be arguing that Buckinghamshire is growing massively, and we ought to give it another year and stick with it. We follow the rules, and we uphold our integrity as democratically elected representatives by following the rules and doing it by the book. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Marland, last point.
Just a point of order, Chair. My understanding of this report is it's to note. It's a point of law, not a point of debate. And therefore we're noting the report because that's what the figures say. And so the points I've made are very clear that I think in the long term, about the size of the authority, it will keep switching backwards and forwards. Both, I think it's incumbent on the members in Buckinghamshire to go back to your leader and your council to say, why have our figures fallen? It's incumbent on us to go back and ask why our figures have fallen. I've already done so, but this report is a legal and governance report, and it's to note. It's not a matter of debate.
Absolutely. The recommendation is there that the report is noted, and that we request to appoint 12 councillors, from the councils of Buckinghamshire and Milton Keynes, and 5 councillors respectively, as as representatives to the members of Buckinghamshire and Milton Keynes Fire Authority for the municipal year 2022-2023. And I think we have agreed that. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much indeed, everybody, for perhaps a nice meeting, even if there were a few political points scored, but thank you very much indeed. Safe journey home, and our next meeting is on the, Katie? So the next meeting of the authority is on the 15th of June. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.